All right, we are live. I am so excited today. We have a special guest who's going to be coming on the show. So Naeemah Elias is going to be here. So we did a little test beforehand. So we have a great topic. We're going to be talking about all things, but I don't really know where the conversation may or may not go. This is a brand new experiment. Here we are. We did it again. Twice. Twice. It works every time. It kind of reminds me of this affirmation: everything is always working out for me. I didn't expect chaos. And so everything is just like happening.
Yeah, I would say the universe provides.
Yes, right.
You have to be open to receiving it, and it's all going to be.
It's all flowing, which is my goal today. I'm like, let it just flow. I feel like we always just talk from the moment we met, even though we didn't know each other. So I'm just like, we know each other now. This better work. It's like, it's just gonna flow. So if it works the first time, I don't know how many times that we talk now. So thank you for being on. I was reading all about you. I was just like, I know some things, but I don't know everything. So I'm like, let me check, because I think a lot happened in the last year, right?
Yeah.
Or even the last month. I'm like, your life is like, I don't know, it's a movie. From the little snippet that I do know, I'm like, so much happened, right? So I wanted to start a little bit by really thinking about, describe this year for me. Like, I don't know if they can be in one word or words. Like, how would you describe your year?
Activating transformational energy. Yeah. So, and I would say the last year and a half, right? So in the beginning of 23, I started meditating for the first time. And my brain is always doing all the things. And I was just like, I can't meditate, and I found a program that pushed me. And by the end of February, I was meditating twice a day. And then in March, I started a whole nutrition journey and just completely changed my relationship with food. And over the course of the year, I lost 60 pounds. And so that was February and March. In April, I left my company after 13 years and with no next step. Right. And I spent the summer just kind of hanging out with the kids and thinking about kind of what was going to be next and interviewing and talking to folks. And then I had written my vision for the work that I wanted to do, but I hadn't defined it as starting a business. It was just, this is how I want to spend my time. And then I accidentally started a business.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I was like, accidentally got my first 2 clients. I'm like, I want some accidents in my life. Right? I want that kind of accident. 2 clients without even I'm sure there were effort, right? So this is what I would call planting seeds, because I don't even see them accident, because if you've been doing that work for more than a decade, there's no way that it just happened, in the period of time that it happened, right? You've done some things that led
to those results. And that's what my mom keeps reminding me, right? She's like, you can't say you just started your business, right? You're activating work that you have been doing for the last 2 decades, right? Yeah. I have been coaching people. I have been training in public speaking. I've been doing all of these things for years within the confines of the company. And so stepping out and doing it on my own for the first time wasn't creating something new. It wasn't oh, now I do this. It was, now I'm doing this intentionally. But like you said, I had planted a lot of seeds. I had built a ton of relationships. I had coached and trained and developed a lot of people.
Yes. So
when the time came for me to start playing, it just kind of happened naturally, right? I had some conversations with folks and they were like, oh yeah, we need that. But it wasn't a surprise, because I had been doing this work for so long with the company, and every division I talked to was like, oh yeah, we need that. So I knew what people needed.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great, especially because I don't even know how to describe that period for you. Usually it's more like a transition or things are happening, but it's even within the work that you were doing, technically that wasn't your role, right? So there are some spaces where whatever you're there to do, that's all you're there to do. And I think a lot of the time, maybe it's a reflection of the leadership where you were at, where they were more open, because there are some spaces where they are so rigid. It's like, whatever you're here to do, that's what you, even though what you're offering is a need, right? It's not even like we're doing this as a fun little thing. Like, it's almost like a necessity for them to continue sort of like whatever work they're here to do. It can only be for the benefit of the company and the people, right? But not every place would be open because it's different.
So I was lucky, and I was also intentional, right? So, you know, the first workshop that I ran, it was because I had a manager say, this is something I believe you can do. So create this for my team. So the first time it was a manager saying, do this, right? And then moving from there, as I moved into new roles, when I was interviewing, when I was discussing the opportunities, I would say, oh, by the way, here's this other work that I do on the side. I'm coaching interns, I'm coaching young professionals. I'm going to continue to do that, and I need that to be okay with you. So I wasn't asking permission. I was just like, hey, this is part of who I am. And I never had a manager say no. But I think if they had, then that would have been an indication to me that this wasn't the right team.
Or it's not even a fit, because again, like for me, based on my own sort of like assessment, it's like every company can benefit from it, but it's not always something where they may prioritize. But then when you have somebody on the team internally that can offer what you already need, and so for me, it's an interesting thing, because I see a lot of people miss that boat, right? Where they have the talent in-house, but they don't see it. Like, we might see it as people on the team because you know what the people are doing, but the decision makers seem almost blinded by what's right there in front of them, which is always interesting. So, I mean, in a way, it's a great thing that it worked out. And then it's almost like a smoother transition in terms of like you were not doing something new or learning something to bring it back to your team. It was something, it seems like, you've always naturally been doing. So even the idea of entrepreneurship, you said something recently, different interview, where you mentioned, because I always want to know how that came about, because sometimes it happened naturally, but other things led to it, right? So especially now, entrepreneurship seems to be like a very trendy, you know, like everybody seems to want to be that, which, you know, it's not all it appears to be. I think, especially in your case, the easier you make it look, the harder that I know that it is, especially if you're not clear in terms of what your intentions are and what you want. And so, did you grow up with parents and surrounded by entrepreneurs, or was it just something that sort of happened along the way in your journey?
So I think I said this was before. My parents were entrepreneurs with no access, right? So they didn't have means, they didn't have access. And so they were always making stuff, right? My dad was always carving really cool things out of wood. My mom made things out of fabric. They quilted. They were always creating really cool things. And, you know, they sell 2 or 3 of them. But mostly we just had like a house that evolved over time with my parents' creations. And not having access to be able to really turn those into full-fledged businesses, I got the business mindset, but no sales, right? And I always said, you know, I'm never going to start a business. And when it's, you know, when it started to come up and it was introduced, I don't know, years ago, people were like, oh, you should write a book. Oh, you should start a business. You should do this. You should do that. And I'm like, I'm an artist. I just want to show up and do my art. I'm not interested in the behind the scenes stuff of it. You know, and I always thought I'd be a terrible business person because I'm not interested in doing the work. You know, I just want to show up. I want everything to be done for me. And I want to walk into the room and be an artist. Right. And then I found myself without a job, and my severance was running out and my unemployment was running out. And like, I was interviewing, but there was a point where I was like, oh, like 2 months from now, there's going to be no more money coming in. Like everything is going to stop. And I mean, it, like, my life doesn't stop at that point, but you know, the runway is not that long before I'm going to have a really hard time. And so I talked with a gentleman at the University of Tennessee about some coaching. And he was like, yeah, I want to bring you in and have you run an offsite for my team. Is that something you can do? And I was like, yeah. Sure. Right. And then I was talking with a woman who runs an organization teaching technology to women to have them move into IT fields. And she's like, I would love for you to come in and do some leadership training and some confidence training for these women. Is that something you could do? And I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. And right. And then I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, I have a whole business. I have a plan. I have work that I can do. I had a leader ask me about 6 months before I left the bank. He said, if I give you a white sheet of paper, like blank paper, anything you want, and you could write your job, what would it be? And so I took 2 months and I wrote my ideal job. Wow. Well, I didn't realize I was like writing my business plan. I was just like, here's what I'd like for you to pay me to do. And so then ultimately, you know, when I started realizing that I was starting a business, I went back to that framework and said, okay, here's the space that I want to play. Here's the work that I want to do. How do I market this? How do I talk to folks who know what I can do, who've seen me in the room, who've been coached by me, and ask them to give me a chance and bring me into their new companies.
Yeah. I love the way you describe it, because you're like, where do I want to go play? Who do I want to go play with? Versus, because it can be overwhelming. And I think sometimes we forget, depending on what you've been through and who and how people have received you, it can be almost like we forget with the talent, we forget with the assets, right? And so we start acting like they know better, versus like, no, like you are it in terms of as a person. And so as you're speaking, without like doing the usual formal stuff, because I find those of us who just naturally do the thing versus when you train to do it, like there's a weird difference. Like sometimes you pitch and you see somebody else pitch and you're like, why do they sound so robotic, right? But then as you're speaking and sharing the stuff with people, you are pitching what it is. You are, you know, literally sharing your proposal, but it doesn't feel that way, right? And I think that's the piece sometimes people forget, because you think it's going to be like a formal thing, like the meeting is going to happen and then it happens. But it also seems like you were ready, because as those people were saying, can you do this? Can you do that? Because sometimes I hear people say what they want, and then when it presents itself, I almost feel like they block their own blessing, where like, I've been asking, and then when it's presented, now it may be presented by someone or place you didn't expect it to. And I see people don't see it as the opportunity, and they literally block it by not responding the way you respond, or by not being open and hearing like what's being offered. And then it never happened, and they're like, well, nobody ever do this. And I'm like, it came, and you literally did not see it as the thing you've been asking for, and did not receive it.
I had this exact conversation with a client 2 hours ago. And where I was like, okay, if you were ready to take that next step, what would that next step be? And he was just like, oh, no, I'm not title chasing. I'm not looking for the next thing. Like, I'm happy where I am. I'm having a great experience. And I was like, great. So like, if I were to manifest a next role for you, these are the 2 areas I think you would go. Is that accurate? And he said, yeah. I said, so what if somebody left that job today? Would you be ready for it? And he says, oh, no. I said, then I need you to think about what's the difference? What's the distance between where you define yourself today and what is required to do that role? And you block it because you're like, oh, I'm not ready. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand. And I always coach people, like, if you have 60% of what the job requires, you're more than qualified. If you have 100% of what the job requires, you're overqualified, and it's time for you to be looking for the next level up. So like writing down where I wanted to play and what I wanted to do meant that when I started to navigate opportunities, I already had it on paper, right? Like I sort of said, this is what I do. And so when somebody said to me, can you do this? I'm like, well, I didn't write that specifically, but it's in the realm of where I want to play. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a great exercise. It's almost like a vision, like a true vision board, or envisioning, and then putting it down on paper, right? In terms of writing it. Because like, even for me, there are some job description that I see, they stress me out just reading. Just reading them stress me out. And I know the job is not what's being presented. And I think when you can sit down and say, or sometimes people say the thing you would want to be hired for, right? So if you write it out and then you present it and say, this is what I'm doing now, it's very different, because you're literally saying what you want to do, No one is forcing you to say, these are your responsibilities. And I think when you do it that way, it's very different than you take something out of desperation or because you have to. Like, I've been in your place where it's like, you know, unemployed, the thing is going to run out. And you're like, either you're just going to take whatever comes, which means you may take something that's not even in alignment with what you wrote down or what you've been thinking about, or you took the same thing you left because now I got to do something. Or you do something you've always done, right? And people do that, and then you find yourself again in the same position you were in, you know, years ago, months ago, or even, you know, it's not sad, but it's like you said you wanted to be in a different place, and it's almost like sitting in a car, and you knew you wanted to be like in a different specific destination, and you literally exactly where you were 10 years ago. To me, that's like the worst thing. It's like getting older, but I'm staying exactly where I'm at. So there was no growth at all, except I'm older. But it's stuck.
Scary. It's scary though, right? So as I was going through the months of trying to decide, like, am I going to leave or am I going to stay? I'm talking to my therapist. In the beginning, I was just like, I'm out of here. I'm done. This is happening. I'm moving on. Everything's going to be amazing. And then as time wore on and I wasn't finding that job that I thought I was looking for, I remember saying to her at one point, and if I don't find something by such and such a date, then I'll probably get more intentional about searching for internal roles. And she was like, wait, we've already done that, right? Like, we've already moved on from that. Making the decision and manifesting a backward step doesn't make any sense for you, right? You figured out what brings you joy. You figured out what does not bring you joy. And you have gotten what you could get from this amazing experience. And it was an incredible experience, right? I spent 13 years at the bank. I went from being an executive assistant to a managing director in a decade, right? I did the work. I did the mobility. I added an enormous amount of value to the organization, and the organization added a lot of value to me. So, like, I have no regrets, but it was time. And even though it was time, there was still this part of me that was just like, but I need to reach back for my safety blanket. Right. And that step out into the unknown is scary. But there's the analogy of, like, you're leaving California and you're driving to New York at night. Okay. And you know, there's a lot of miles of road between you. And all you can see is 6 feet ahead. That's it. But you trust that that next 6 feet is going to unveil itself, right? As if you just keep moving, the next 6 feet is going to appear. And so operating with that level of trust, operating with that level of understanding that if I just keep taking the steps forward, that next piece is going to reveal itself. Then you can have this extraordinary experience. But if you're afraid to go beyond that 6 feet because you can't see it at this moment, like you said, you will be sitting there in that car, not moving a decade from now, 2 decades from now. And that is more horrifying to me than moving into the unknown.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary because it happens, but I don't know if people are consciously aware that's what's happening until you look back and you're like, oh my God, I'm still here. And then that fear also of, like, that comfort, right? Because even though you know you want to make the next step, it's almost like staying is so much easier because then you, like you said, the unknown is so scary, but it's like, if you don't take it, sometimes this is it, right? It's almost like this is the moment. Like, either you leap now or it's just going to close, but you don't know when it's closing. So it's like, if you like overthinking, and we have a lot of people who are like getting ready to be ready. I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready. And it's like, and then somebody else who probably weren't even thinking. I see a lot of people with things. I know you're a spontaneous person where they just like make a decision. They just decided. And then sometimes people get mad. They're like, I've been here and this person just blah, blah, blah. They literally just took the shot. They literally just took it. And whoever was deciding was like, fine, you can come and do this. Where you, of course, you may have been overqualified, but if you don't take the shot, you don't know until you do. And I think it's hard to even get someone to that place because you can't do it for them. And I'm sure you've been in that situation where sometimes I find myself wanting something more for my clients and they do it. And I'm like, I can't make the move. Like, you literally the only one who can make the move. Like, there's no amount of like coaching, encouraging and nurturing and supporting that can make that person. Like, if they're not going to do it, they're not going to do it. Right. And it's hard because you know they can, and it's just not happening. And so that's a little challenging there. But even through that whole process, I still sometimes want to go back, because there are times I said to myself, I think I was bolder when I was younger.
Sure.
Like I didn't overthink decisions. I feel like there was so many things I did from like high school to college where I just did it. Where it's like, I don't have the resources, I don't know people, and I was like so young. And it sort of made me wonder, like who did little Naeemah wanted to be when you were like, who did you want to be? Were you always this way? Because I feel like sometimes when people meet us now, it's almost like, and they meet us at a stage or at a period of like great success, but I feel like you are grounded in who you are, and I feel like you've always been a badass. But then I don't know if you just sort of like became that over time. And so I don't know what's the like between the younger you and now. Do you see a difference?
Absolutely. And my friend Peter's on here, and I hope he doesn't call me out, right? There's absolutely a difference, right? Like college me was, so I was, straight A student, worked really hard in elementary school with the focus of getting out of poverty and having a different life experience. And college me was, for the first time in my life, I'm in a space where I have freedom, right? So I grew up in a household where I have 4 brothers, very strict gender roles, like just a lot of restriction, right? And then stepping into college for the first time, I was just like, oh, I can do whatever I want. And so I was wild, and I played and
but
I partied,
you're
right?
away from home. You are not home.
I was
So
900 miles away from home, right? And then there's this whole thing of like, you find yourself in the space of freedom, and you're just like, okay, I want to do all of the things that I wasn't allowed to do. I want to do all of the things. But in terms of like where the career path was going to take me, I didn't have a real concept for that. I studied psychology because it was interesting, and my dad told me I couldn't study theater, right? And so like that was the foundation for it. And then I'm like, I'm going through the college experience. I'm learning a lot. I'm playing a lot. I was doing mentorship when I was in college. We had a hotline for, at-risk queer youth, basically. And the idea was, it effectively was a suicide hotline, right? Like we had, we would staff it overnight, and people would call you, and they would be in, in great crisis. And you knew you just had to get them through to the morning. Right? Like if we can get through to the daylight, then like everything will look different, and things will be better. And so stepping into that space and learning about the experiences that these young people faced growing up, like hurt my heart. It was a real struggle for me. And so I got really involved in the community, but from the perspective of a mentor, of a coach, of an advisor, of a counselor, right? Like being a person who could help people to see that maybe there's a path through, right? And then I was a professional actress when I graduated, and I did that for a little while, and I had like random day jobs while I was doing theater. But in terms of being responsible and like always like having to take care of business, I'm the second of 6 children. I'm the oldest girl. Like I grew up in a household where we didn't always have food on the table. And so the sense of responsibility was really strong from an early age, right? Like the summer that is like most prominent in my memory, it was the summer that I was 11, and both of my parents were working. And so I was in charge. Like my brother was off working. I was 11. So my next brother was 10. My next brother was 8. My sister was 6, and I was in charge. So it was a different time. Gen X was, a different era. But I think I was always expected to take care of business. I was always expected to make sure that everything was okay. And then, whatever else I wanted to do on the side, I could do on the side. So I learned how to be frivolous, but also maintaining some sense of responsibility. And then I had a challenging marriage, and that was a real struggle for me. And so going through a divorce with 2, 4, and 6-year-old, right, that was intense. And then realizing, okay, I can't play anymore. Like I can't continue to not make much money and just kind of do whatever. Like I have to actually get serious about building a career and providing for my family. And while I'm doing that in the day job, I still had the concept of the day job, right? Yeah. So process design, transformation work, and all of that. On the side, I'm doing this coaching work. I'm doing this work that I'm called to, that brings me joy. And that's sort of the foundation for, kind of landing here today. So have I always been a badass? Back to your question. Right. Like on
The thing
some
is, when you
level,
being it, you don't really think that way, right? It's always other
yeah,
people who see almost like the superhero where you're just like,
yeah.
I'm just a regular, whatever. But it's like, no, your regular is different than other people.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. Yeah. I'm always going to show up. I'm always going to bring my A game. I'm always going to figure out how do I make it better for the people around me. And so I think part of like my superpower is I don't want to rise alone. Right. And so whatever it is that I'm doing, if I've got a gift that I can share that can make somebody's life around me better, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
And so it
Yeah,
shines.
I love that approach because there are so many times we see people doing things. Like, so one of my challenges is that I see people doing great things. And for example, like right now, that idea of the transition, especially after the pandemic, I see a lot of people now, especially women, like, I can't keep doing this, especially when we think of the workplace and the
Yeah.
job and the relationships and so many different things that we know have been not a fit, right? It's just out of alignment and we know it, but then
Yeah.
you're stuck. And I think especially women of color, people of color, where it's like, for me, it's like reaching a point where I'm like, I'm sick and tired of doing what I got to do. Right. So, when you have mouths to feed, you have a family, you need to put a roof over your head. All this talk about purpose and dream and all this stuff. There are days where I'm just like, I can't. That thing is not even for
Yeah.
me because you have so much to worry about to just live and survive. Where that conversation just seems like, I don't know what that's about, but I don't have any room left to be thinking about that part, right? If even when I'm thinking about you, like as a little girl, we were dreaming, and that thing is gone when you get to a certain age, and you just again gotta do what you gotta do. And some of us gotta do what we gotta do since we were little. Like if you're the oldest, I'm also one of the oldest, right? So you always feels like you're sacrificing, where it's like you were an adult before you were an adult.
Yeah.
But then you reach a point where I'm like, this chapter cannot keep going the same way, where I'm just doing and surviving just to make it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you balance that? Like with that, like there's something more you want to do? Because I know there's a lot of people where you're doing it, right? But then I noticed that sometimes people don't know how to show me the blueprint. Like, give me an example versus giving me like little things where I'm like, you get a little piece, but I'm like, I don't know the whole GPS. Like, just give me the thing that can help me get. It may not be where you're going, but at least I'll be like, okay, so if I do this, it may lead to that. But again, it's all up to you if you want to follow that GPS, right? Like, what do people look for in terms of when they're talking to you and you feel like if they get this, would they do it? Or do you see people like you give them the map or you give them the GPS and they're still like, I'm not gonna do it?
So one of the biggest things for me is you can't wait until you're ready to explode, right? I was in a place of great anger. I was, still working in corporate. I was interacting with some folks who were causing a lot of stress. I legit, like every time there was a list, every time there was a layoff, I had a list of names that I would go look up to see if they still work for the company. Like people who caused me that level of stress that I was praying for their severance, right? I was praying for them to be exited. And that anger, that frustration builds and builds and builds. And you get to a point where you don't have the capacity to be patient with your children. You don't have the capacity to be patient with your spouse.
Yeah.
You're not giving in your real life the you that you want to be because everything you have is being taken in your corporate life. And if you get to that point, then something has to give, right? And that something could be that like your children move out and decide not to come back because mommy's angry all the time, or your spouse decides that they're done because they can't be bothered with being with somebody who's a mess and who's filled with rage, right? The something that has to give won't necessarily be the job. Like you'll stick with that and fight for it and lose your entire self while that's happening. And so the big thing for me is being thoughtful about like what are the other paths, right? And I have a client who was just like, oh my gosh, like if I lose my job, I just don't know what would happen. And I said, okay, well, let's follow that thread. What would happen? What are your skills? What are your talents? What are the possibilities? Who would immediately want to pull you on board to play and do things that are interesting to you because of who you are? And when you follow that thread and get really thoughtful about what are the other things I can do and how I can show up in the world, all of a sudden what you're doing right now is less attractive.
Yeah.
you know? And so I always challenge people to follow the thread of what would happen if I lost it. What would I do if I lost it? And then that's a conversation that you have to have with yourself. And then you start to uncover what would I really want to do with my time, right? Because when you don't have a choice, it creates new choices, right? It creates a new space to play. So in terms of like the blueprint, step one, don't wait until you're exploding with rage, because everything else is going to break before that job goes away. And like, it's not the most important thing, but it wins over and over again. Two, what would happen if everything goes wrong? Like, what would you do? What could you do? How would you provide for your family? How would you continue to move forward? What are your options? And then, hey, is one of those better? Right?
Yeah.
And then in terms of starting a business, you don't have to scrap it all and just go all in and start a business full time. Like, if there's work that you want to do, start doing that work. If you work for a corporation, make sure you're clear on their sort of non-compete and, extracurricular activity policy. And then start playing, start building, find a client, right? Like I've talked to a number of women who are just like, I want to start a business and I'm thinking about it and I'm working on starting a business. And like, first I need to build out a whole business plan. And then I need to come up with the right name for it. And then I have to think about my branding colors.
Yes.
And then I have to do this. And I'm like, stop. You don't have to do none of that.
Yeah.
None of that. None of that. What you have to do is find a client. Find one person who's willing to pay you for your gifts.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and be willing to even ask, because I think sometimes what you may find with some people is like they've been doing it, but it's this is what they do naturally. So there are some people who's probably been coaching since they were like in middle school.
Yep.
Like if you're that person everybody comes to, where you just like whenever they're looking for solution or things are happening, right? And so, we have some people who they agree. They were like, this is what's happening, right? And they agree to it. And so I'm hoping people have you as a support, and I'm hoping people are willing to ask for help, because it is so overwhelming that sometimes and then people are trying to figure this out on their own. So imagine you have job stress, you stress at home, you juggling all these different things and thinking like, I'm going to deal with it. And I'll encourage everyone listening to know, like, you can ask for help. Like if you know someone, you can say, hey, how do I do this? And I see people making so many different decisions or so many things that are like temporary, right? Not having a job, it's temporary.
Right.
Or what if this happened is temporary. So we have all these worries that happen. And I think people don't realize those worries are affirmation. So imagine if you were thinking of other things, more about possibilities and what you can do, and versus like being anxious about the thing that you have zero control over. And so that encouragement where you say, you know what, let's think about that. Because I think a lot of time people wait until things happen. And it's funny because you move differently when you are like in a crisis, right? Versus like now you have the time to talk to you, to see what would you do. And I find that people move slower, where it's like, I got time. Versus when it's like, this is it. Like you got to make a decision, but you don't have to be cornered. Like it's almost like when I tell people, you don't need to get a diagnosis to get healthy. You could just be healthy. Like don't wait until something and then now you doing it with resentment because you're like, I gotta eat this, I don't want to do this. Versus now, you could just be healthy and do the thing in moderation, versus feeling like I'm being forced to do. And that's when desperation comes, because you might make a decision again based on desperation or based on I gotta do something, versus like now you're walking someone through that process, which is very different than like waiting, right? But
And
I do get those
I tell my clients, I tell everybody, like, everybody needs a team, right? I needed a therapist, right? My husband said to me, you're angry a lot. Like you're lashing out at everybody around you. We're starting to feel it. You're angry a lot. And I was like, oh, then I need somebody to help me process that. So I went and found a new therapist and started working with her. And she told me, maybe we had been working together for a year. She said to me, Naeemah, I want to reflect on how far you have come. When you and I first met, you said to me, I'm so angry and I can't imagine ever not being angry again. And I was like, ooh, damn. Wow. Yes. I don't remember. I remember being enraged. I don't remember the language, right? I don't remember how I expressed it, but I needed to explain to her where I was so she could help get me out of that. And I needed her. And I talked to her every week in the beginning and just worked through like my explosive rage, right? So if you've got emotional stuff that you're working through, a therapist is powerful for that, right? If you've got work stuff that you're figuring your way through, a mentor and or a coach, right? Your mentor who is internal to your company, who understands the intricacies, who understands when you say, my boss did blah, 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 and they're like, yeah, that tracks. That's how they are. Or actually, that doesn't seem right. Let's figure out how we landed in this situation, right? Somebody who could say to you when you're like, you know what, I'm looking to do something new and I'm checking out this team over here. And they're like, no, you don't want to be on that team, right? I'm leaving and I'm going to a new role. And when I leave, you're going to get moved under this manager over here. You don't want to spend a single second working for him. I have this other opportunity that I've been talking to. I want you to think about this role because I'm not going to take it. And I don't want you to have to work for this person. I mean, that's some powerful sponsorship right there, right? So having a mentor who can help you with the internal workings of your company, having a coach who can help you to figure out where you want to go, what do you want to do, what are the things that you're not considering, and who can push back and say, no, I hear you're saying that, but I don't believe you, right? I don't think that's accurate. I think you need to challenge yourself. Somebody who's going to be your truth teller, who's going to be honest, and who's going to kind of push back on you, right? So you got your therapist, you got your mentor, you got your coach, and then you have your community of folks who you're surrounding yourself with who are also being honest with you and helping you to make the right choices, right? So there's all of these people that you want to surround yourself with. I think there's this concept of bootstraps, right? Where you're supposed to be able to pull yourself up, right? If you work hard and keep the focus, then you're supposed to be able to pull yourself up. But that is a concept that is created to keep you from actually moving forward, right? No person living in abject poverty with no resources is capable of moving up on their own. Every single one of us that got out because there were a whole bunch of hands reaching out to pull us forward, right? And when we look at the people who are in senior leadership, a lot of times they're in senior leadership because they went to the right schools, they had the right mentors, their aunts and uncles and parents opened doors for them. They came into corporate with relationships already existing. Well, if you come in with none of those things and you're just working on your own steam, your steam alone is not powerful enough to move your locomotive. Right? You need a team of people, and the people who are at the top all have a team. They all have a community. So if you're operating under the assumption that I have to be able to do this on my own and I can't ask for help from anybody, and if I ask for help then I failed, then you've been tricked. And you're carrying a mindset that is actually a blocker and that's going to prevent you from the success that you aspire to.
And that's hard because I think, again, when you choose where you're going to work, and a lot of us, we don't choose, right? Like if you just take it because I got to pay those bills, you don't think about the place, you don't think about the people. And I think a lot of the time people don't thrive because of leadership, because of the people. And so if it's going to be about relationship, and again, it's not a fit, there's no amount of skills and whatever you have. And then people are like, let me keep my head down and do what I got to do. Like you could work the hardest. And most of us, there's always one in the space we in where we know they do the least. And yet somehow they seem to just be, I don't know how. They're just getting to the next level. And you know, there's another person or more people who are just like putting in so much more. And when I tell you there's like zero attention or appreciation or promotion coming their way, they could keep working until like, who knows what's going to happen next. And most likely it's going to be them harming themselves or decide to quit, because a lot of the time there's things in motion to make you leave. And there are things in motion to help some people thrive, which is crazy. But again, we think it's just going to happen naturally. Like you're just going to get that boss who just happened to want to support you. And not all of us, you know, to be in that environment, so fortunate to have both mentors, sponsors, and people who are literally investing in your success. Because I haven't experienced it since I was like a teenager. I think once I became grown, it was just like nobody cares, right? People care, but those in position of power that you happen to be around, it seems scarce. People do, but it's like when you think of the workplace, like for me, it's been outside. So I love it when you say like you have the job and then you have things you do outside of the job, because there are people where it's like the job is them.
Everything.
It is who they are. And I think the pandemic shows us that way. If there's nothing else, like for me, I've always had a second, almost like a second life, right? Where it's like, that's the life that should be the primary life.
Yeah.
But that's not the life that pays me, right? So the other part that where you in spaces where you're not even seen, like I have somebody describe something, I describe it on paper, where you're not seen, but we both describe our existence in that space as invisible ghosts. I was like, you're a ghost and you're invisible on top of being a ghost? That's like, you're not even there. And that's the feeling sometimes people get, where it shouldn't be that way, right? But we know the workplace is not always welcoming to all. And it happens across industries. It's not even one. I used to think corporate was like the ultimate nightmare. And then I realized is in all spaces, like even in places where it's like it's artsy, people are this, but then again, it depends on the relationship in that space. But I'm hoping people still believe in possibility, that whatever they're dealing with now is temporary, that there's some place, a group of people who are better. Because sometimes we think like it's not gonna get better, and knowing that there are other companies, other people, and again, you can start recreating that. Like we can create it. So sometimes we think things are just gonna happen. Things happen to us versus like, can I create the life that you want by design? Just like you were saying, like let's work this out, right? Let's just like play it out and see like what exactly do you want, versus allowing things to happen by accident, where it's like you get to decide like what do you want to do, and then do the things that get you in that direction, versus waiting, I don't know who's gonna come to save you or give you the thing you're looking for. And especially when most of the time people don't say it, which led me to the work you do around communications. Because I was reading somewhere where a lot of spaces where you have a lot of talented people, but they might be, they're not the person who speak up, right? They're not the person who say, I am this, I'm amazing at this, and this is what I've done. They think the manager or the person is just gonna notice. And the funny thing is, they don't. Like you think they would, and they don't. So,
but they don't have time, right? They, you know. And so I had this huge eye-opening moment. I went to a fireside chat with an executive vice president, right? And this was a woman, and I was just like, okay, like she's part of the tribe, like she gets it, the whole thing. And the group of people were a young group of folks who I think were, they were either internships or it was some sort of like a work study kind of program, right? Like these are sort of entry level folks who are not standard hires. And she came in to talk to them, and what she said to them was, if you don't ask me for a promotion, I'm not thinking about you. And I was like, wait, are you allowed to say that? And she said, I have so many people working for me, doing so many things, and many of them are doing incredible things. And I have a population of folks who are regularly asking me, what's next, what's next, what's next? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? Can I do that? It takes all of my capacity to manage those people. And if you're not asking, I'm not thinking about it. I'm assuming you are happy where you are, that you're working really hard because you enjoy the work, and this is where you want to be. So unless you are raising your hand and saying, I want something else, I'm not going to look at you to offer it to you. And that was like, wait, what?
The reality check. Cool.
What? Because if I'm showing up and I'm doing all the work, I don't understand. Why would you not automatically want to promote me? They don't want to promote you because you're doing all the work. They want to keep you on the team because you are a huge value add for the team. It's not a slam. They want you, right? But if you want something different, you have to be willing to raise your hand and say that you want something different, right? So one of the things that I do when I'm coaching managers is I don't just coach individuals on how to climb the ladder. I'm coaching managers around how do you think about creating space for the people who are not raising their hands? Are you denying introverts access on your team because they're not raising their hand and saying they want something more, right? Are you denying people who were raised not to ask questions or challenge authority, opportunities to grow because they were raised in that way, right? And so I have a check-in template that I've used with managers for, a decade. And it's sort of evolved over the years. And it's like, here's my document that I'm going to use every time I sit down with my manager to make sure they know everything they need to know. One of the most important pieces of that document, page 2, accomplishments. Every time I have a milestone, every time I have a major accomplishment that I want to have on my manager's radar, it's on that document. And at any given point when my boss is looking for like, how do I write Naeemah's performance review, or how do I think about the value that Naeemah has added? You don't have to wonder. It is all right there on that piece of paper. And it's been growing since the last performance review. I'm not taking anything off. I'm just adding things on. And when it's time for you to write or speak on my behalf, you have everything you need right there in front of you.
Good to see it.
So I don't have to walk into the room and be like, oh, I did a great job on this, or look at what I did, or look at that. I'm writing it down. I'm putting it in front of the manager. And then when we go through our check-in, I'm just like, okay, so just a couple of quick highlights. Like here's the latest milestones and accomplishments I want to make sure are on your radar. And then we move on, right? And then I'm coaching managers that you have a responsibility to make sure that when you go into the leadership meeting and you are talking about this work, maybe bring Marie into the room and say, Marie's going to present the project that she just did, right? Maybe invite Susan into the room and say, Susan's going to tell you about the work that she's proposing. Instead of presenting it yourself always as the manager, use leadership meetings as an opportunity to highlight your team and let them shine, right? So, we got to think about the work from the perspective of the leaders. We got to think about the work from the perspective of the employees. And if we're doing the work on both sides, then we sort of open up this space for people to grow and to build. Yeah. And that's if you want to work within a company, right? If you want to work as an entrepreneur and you want to work in a different space, then you have to think about like, how do I create capacity for myself to be able to do this work that I want to do? And so maybe that's, I'm not raising my hand to run an ERG. I'm not raising my hand to present and to step forward and to do all of these extra activities. Instead, I'm really focusing on how do I do this work? How do I create the capacity to do this work that I want to do on the other side over here, right?
Yeah. I like that two-pronged approach, because I think sometimes there's so much focus on like the employee doing all the heavy lifting, right? And talking to both, I think it's a nice synergy in terms of it's not heavily dependent on, because a lot of the things too, like thinking about, first of all, the work culture. And for me, I always go to leadership. Whatever's going on within a company, I don't care how much talent you got going on, it's a reflection of the leadership. And so part of it is, as busy as they are, I think a lot of it is also about like taking that time, because sometimes I feel like you missed out on, again, something that's like right in front of you, just like we miss out on opportunity because we blocking it. Managers sometimes block what's in front of them because it's not presented the way they think is going to be presented, right? It's not the flamboyant person. I mean, there are people who do like so little and they highlight it. Like, oh my God, I just picked up a box from the front door and I brought it over here. And I'm sitting there like, you gotta be kidding. And that's the person. Every little thing they do, they highlight it. And to us, it just seems like you would pick up on that and notice that's fluff in comparison to like someone truly doing heavy lifting. But again, the idea of like letting people know that what you think people are observing or will naturally pick up on. Now, some managers, I've seen them pick up on it, right? It's almost like for me, I'm always scouting, right? So people who say they're looking for things and there are people looking for you, you don't have to raise your hand. I'm not that person. If it's like, I've been looking for someone to do X, Y, and Z, or like a creative or combo, and I see that person, I'm getting that person. I'm not waiting for them to come to me. So that's the other thing too, where I'm like, if you're looking for like your team to be multi-talented and you're waiting for this talent to apply, that's insane. That's not always going to happen. But if you also paying attention and know there's a missing piece within your company or within your team, I am looking for that person. So if I notice something at an event or some other thing, I will recruit that person. I'm not going to wait for them to be like, do you have anything open? And that's the other thing too. I'm like, I'm not waiting for somebody to apply. If I picked up on a set of skills that I'm looking for and I see it in action, why am I waiting for them to be like, And that might take 3-4 months before that person get the who knows what to be like, it's me. Who has the thing you're looking for? So that's the other thing where it's like there's so many layers in terms of the role of the employee, the other people, and then just the idea, like you mentioned, culturally, some people may even see this as like boasting, right? Especially with women, to constantly, and you know who do this all the time, constantly be like the center of attention. And it's not even quality that you really, that person is like the talking all the time, the talking before thinking, the saying whatever comes to you, versus sometimes the person who's literally taking notes and may have a whole plan on what should be happening, and then they're just waiting for the right time, which may not happen. But the one who talks who may say 1% of something that's even remotely close, that's the person who get the whatever, right? Who gets the reward. And so that teaching is important because we don't learn that. Like our parents and other people, you could have gone through tons of school and years of working, and you not like intentionally being taught, like, how do you do this in the workplace? Especially when you think of sometimes immigrants and other people in other spaces where you think, like, if I just put my head down and work hard, like all of us knew this. If I get the right, like for me, sometimes I look and I see like you get the right education, the right experience, you line up all the things that should naturally lead to success. It doesn't happen, right?
No.
And people sometimes wonder, like, why do I work so hard? And it doesn't happen. It's like they still don't understand like that particular culture of the place that they're in, and the change has to come from them, right? The place is not gonna. I mean, some places do change, like you were saying, like they recognize the researcher is not the flamboyant. This person is like, you're introverted or not, unless they're like, what do you call the in-between people? Unless they're both, where they're like in the right context, they can magically just now start speaking. And then 90% of the time, they're just like in their head and like creative mode, which, you know, those people. But it doesn't always happen where they do it. It may just be like it never happened. And what you also get is like the retention is an issue where they just leave. After a while, they just like they disqualify themselves and be like, I'm out. This is not the place for me to go. And in a way, it's not just them who may have lost, the company or the team may have lost, because that person may have had something that could benefit them as well. And so that's a lot, I think, to balance. But I think the work seemed to be, I think it's great when you come in and they bring you in versus waiting for individuals to really see that's needed. Because one of the things I noticed, like you talk about therapy, you talk about coaching, I don't see most people even in this day and age, voluntarily saying, I need someone to guide me through this process. And for that to be like not a taboo, like we don't do that. And I'm like, so we're gonna keep figuring this out until we what, in our 50s, 60s, and still not where you want to be. It's like, you know, like flying can take you where you want to go, and you're like, I'm not, let me just drive, and it takes you like 2 months or like 24 hours to get to a place you could have gotten to in 2 hours if you just got the right person with the map or the blueprint, and you were willing to allow them to show you the way and hold your hands, right? Like, so I don't know if you run into that way. I think especially, like, I find myself in that situation where I'm so used to like doing it by myself, because you don't always get support. And sometimes you may not trust support because you may have had a bad experience where you're thinking somebody was like an ally or a supporter or a mentor, and then it turned out to be let's just say a saboteur. We're going French now, a saboteur. Okay, I don't know what the other word. I can't use the other word I want to use, but it turned out with that experience. So then that person now is like, okay, I can't trust, because trust is not a guaranteed thing in the workplace, in any kind of relationship. And so how do you teach those people where it's like, well, not everyone will do that, and how do you do that and still protect your mental health, for lack of a better word, and not think like I can't ask for the help because of what happened in the past?
So I think if you let one experience stop you from moving forward, then you are not going to move forward, right? Like you can't say one strike and you're out. It just doesn't work that way. And so if you have one bad experience and you're like, okay, that's it, I'm never going to go down that path again. I mean, you're blocking yourself. You're creating barriers for your success. You do have to engage multiple people. So in terms of how do you find the people that you can trust, former managers who you had a great working relationship with and who you feel like looked out for you, like those are really good people to have as mentors and sponsors. When you're doing projects and they're sort of, you know, across the organization and you're building relationship with people that you find that you really work well with, those people are good to have as mentors and partners as you are moving forward in your career. So you can naturally find the people who will be your mentors through the relationships that you are sort of forced to have while you're doing your day job. And so through those relationships, you can kind of find your way to the people, the community of folks who are going to help to sponsor you and to help you to grow. The therapy thing is really difficult, right? I've seen situations where people have, interviewed 15, 20 therapists, right? Like every therapist you're interested in meeting with, you go to them and you can do like a free consultation. Okay. And you can have that first discussion and decide, like, is this a person that I feel like I'm going to be comfortable with? And, one of the things that I coach people on is, it's not, am I going to be comfortable talking about this uncomfortable stuff? Because no, you're not, right? But separate the, this is really uncomfortable to talk about from this is a person who's uncomfortable to talk to. And you have to be able to make that distinction when you walk into the room. Like, do I feel comfortable talking to this person? And then if yes, okay, we're going to be able to dig into some stuff that's not so comfortable. Yeah. But the first time you have a conversation with a person, if you're just like, ooh, like something about like this vibe doesn't feel right, or like this person doesn't feel like they're going to give me what I need. Okay, great. It was a great try. Let's move on and let's try something else. And you may have to try 10 therapists before you find the therapist that's going to be the right person for you. But like, isn't it worth the time to try out all of these different people to find the person that you're comfortable sharing the most intimate details of your soul, rather than sticking with somebody who's not the right fit or not having anybody that you can talk to? And when things get really tough and you need to get it out, you're going to get it out. And that may be all over your family. That may be all over your kids. That may be all over your boss, right? Like, I've seen these situations where I've had to tell managers, you are not a therapist. It is not your job to manage the emotional state of your employees. And so if somebody's coming to you constantly with emotional stuff, like, your recommendation to them needs to be, I think there'd be value in you finding a therapist or a coach to really kind of work some of this stuff out, so that when you come to me, it's a little bit more fully fledged.
Yeah. Right? I mean, and you see that happen all the time, where, again, that person where you go to, and it's not always about the work, but you do have people who become the emotional sort of counselor at the workplace. And again, here's another area where sometimes people may not pick up on, because if it wasn't that person, it would be someone else. But the idea of like recognizing like things are not happening magically, right? They, in terms of, if it wasn't for that person, but also knowing like that's not your role, and you can do it with empathy in terms of within that organization, if there's a way to get the support and reach out. Because I think we're still thinking like, I got to figure it out. And believe me, I think even after the pandemic, the workplace have gotten even more overwhelming in terms of lack of support, and people thinking like, let me go find someone to, because one of the things my fear is like, by not addressing all these different things, even though you're not the cause, you will snap. Because it happened years after years after years. And at some point, even if you're an introvert, you will go off on someone. And sometimes it's the wrong person. It's not even, you go off on the messenger. The last person just do something to that open wound that you've had for like a decade, right? That's right. Not addressing it and not having anyone else to talk to, you will get the brunt of that situation. And so I think the ability for people to know, you can, you can do therapy, you can do coach, and be willing to invest in that. Because again, I see people willing and committed to a very toxic job or very toxic relationship, but not as committed to, like you were saying, like talk to multiple people and see who's a fit, and thinking about, okay, what's in the budget? Like, there are some jobs right now, I'm telling you, therapy or counseling should be part of the benefit package.
That's what I was going to say, to ask for what you need, right? So like, therapy is actually a part of the healthcare package for most plans, most corporate plans, as far as I know. And then coaching is something that you can ask for, right? Like, you can say, I'm interested in coaching. Like, is there reimbursement? Just like there's reimbursement for, for college and for classes and all of those different things. Like, companies have discretionary reimbursement funds that they can use for various different things. And so if you want to get a coach and work with somebody on your career development, A lot of times, if you're working for a corporation, they'll subsidize that, right? And the therapy, find somebody who's in network and just kind of play through. And again, do those free consolidations or consultations until you find the person. And then go in, right? And, you know, in the beginning, you know, I've talked to folks who are just like, I'm not trying to share all my personal business with anybody, right? And in the beginning, like maybe you meet, you know, every so often as you're kind of building that relationship and kind of getting comfortable. For me, I was in a place where when I started working with my most recent therapist, I met with her every week. I was just like, I got a lot. Like, you know, once a month isn't going to do it, right? So we started off every week just kind of working through stuff and helping me to manage my emotional threshold and bring that down so that I could function. And right now, the capacity that I have to deal with any number of emotional things that gets thrown at me is substantial, right? It's just like, you know, okay, let's talk about that. All right.